Alright, I think mid-January is usually about the time we do this, so obviously the time has already come back around to do another top 10 of the year. And I saw, I think, when I just saw The Favorite and Beautiful Boy, which I obviously haven't reviewed yet, I think I got to about 240 exactly movies I saw that were released in 2018, which I think is like maybe 10 less than last year, but still, I'd say enough to warrant doing this at this point. Two have managed to evade me so far. I do this without having seen If Beale Street Could Talk or Can You Ever Forgive Me, which does feel a bit. I'm hoping that because this is a really sort of solidified 10, because I usually it's like there's 10 and then it's just a matter of which order they're in, and it's pretty easy to just figure out which ones they are. But there was really stuff like piling in here. There was like so much that would probably be here in like any other year, not just necessarily a weaker year, but just any year, because there's just so. I was really surprised when I look back on it how much stuff came out this year that actually impacted me as much as it did. So stuff like Searching was really close. There's movies like Roma that, like I said, you could say are objectively good probably, but I just kind of didn't quite have enough of an emotional connection to put it here. But there's stuff like Upgrade, Overlord, The House that Jack Built, Private Life, Paddington 2, Bohemian Rhapsody. This is all stuff that probably could have made this in another year, and none of them are here. So and obviously we usually do a sort of honorable mention and then we do 10, but I am opting to just do 10 because I'm still technically doing 11 because there was one where I kind of paired up two movies that pretty much go hand in hand in one slot. So yeah, so technically it's still the same format, just it's a solidified 10 with two in one slot. So I guess we can get into this, but obviously before, always the disclaimer I always feel the need to throw out there because of the way people are. Yes, do try to keep in mind if you're one of those people that this is my personal list, and obviously there'll probably be things here that you either think are overrated or things that aren't here that you really think should be, and you will consider this a list that is obsolete because of that, despite the fact that this is a totally opinion-based thing. Isn't it really pathetic that you still have to say this? But just in case those people are out there, clearly I'm making my own list and not your list, because then what the hell would I be doing? So this is the ultimate 10 or 11 that I came to. So let's just get past that and start this. Number 10 is Mission Impossible Fallout, which is, ever since Christopher McQuarrie took over the Mission Impossible franchise with Rogue Nation, which was just the movie before this, even though it just seemed to keep getting amped up ever since we skipped, we started with De Palma, then we kind of skip over the second movie because it's the second movie. But then I loved what Abrams did with the third movie, and then what Brad Bird did with Ghost Protocol, like really raised the bar. And if Brad Bird raised the bar, I don't know what the hell McQuarrie did. He completely annihilated the bar and said, there is no bar, it's only me now, is what happened. And is just going to continue to do that. And I heard the really exciting news just last night that he's already planning two more sequels that are going to be shot back-to-back, which I don't know if he confirmed it himself, but people are like theorizing that it's going to be like a big finale. Because Cruise will be like turning 60 around that time, so it'll be like this nice send-off, and I'm really... because you kind of want to see, what it is in other hands, but I don't know. Two more McQuarrie Mission Impossible movies are exactly what the action genre needs, I think. The way that he... because like I said, you just have no idea how you could possibly top what has been done prior. So when you watch Rogue Nation, you're like, how do you even go bigger than that? And then you watch Fallout, and it's like, Rogue Nation seems small by comparison. And it's insane, and it's really just... like I said, there's not even sense in using the phrase raising the bar, because, I mean, where even is... there's no... like, it feels endless in regards to the ways he can take this. And obviously, Cruise's devotion to make this as realistic as possible, actually being there, doing all the practical effects, all that stuff. especially when, you know, there's so much criticism nowadays for how CGI heavy a lot of action movies are. It's like to have this consistent series in there, just really taking it to a whole other level in a totally different way, um, is amazing. And of course, you've got, you know, new cast members like Henry Cavill really adding to it also, and previous cast members like Ving Rhames and Simon Pegg, and it just all Rebecca Ferguson, and it all just comes together in this glorious non-stop thing. Like there are those little moments of breathing and all that, especially being a 2.5 hour movie. But I mean, you, it hardly feels like there's any room at all. It just like when you think back to the movie when you're not actually watching it, it just feels like you just watched something that was totally constant throughout, and ends at just the right time, peaks at just the right times, all that stuff. So just really insanely well done, and like I said, it's just really setting an example for what the action genre can still be, and not necessarily going, you know, full CGI the way some movies go. Not that that's always a bad thing, but it's always nice and refreshing to see something this that feels this real in it. So, yeah, amazing. So, number 9 is a totally different movie. Won't You Be My Neighbor? We're going to now talk about the guy that was against violence in media after we talk about Mission Impossible. So, obviously, I'm not the biggest documentary person. Not necessarily that I'm against like nonfiction in general, but just documentaries. More often than not, I tend to zone out at some point because they can't always seem to handle the whole finding a thread and going nonstop without finding lulls and getting too into the information aspect of it, and almost becoming like almost like going back to school as opposed to learning about something that genuinely interests you, which really should be what a documentary feels like. But this doesn't really have any of those problems, and it just it goes from moment to moment, but in a way that still kind of somehow feels cohesive, especially with how he was able to basically build this from the ground up, and then the whole... It's actually a lot of... You'd think it'd be like a middle portion, but it's actually quite early when he goes through the whole, you know, going in front of the guy and basically convincing him to get the money and all that. And it almost feels like... Obviously, the Tom Hanks movie is coming somewhere in this year, and it's like you can sense, you know... a movie version of this, but this documentary does work so well. And once again, kind of feeling like constant, like once something, you know, emotionally hits you, like that's another thing about documentaries is they usually just sort of have like those 1 or 2 money scenes throughout where it's just like, this is the really powerful moment, or this is the really powerful moment. And this is just like kind of those one after the other, especially with all the different issues he went into. But the great thing about that also is, I know a concern about this movie when it first came out was people thought it was going to be like, well, taking somebody that's basically known for being practically saintly, and it's like, well, how do you do that without making it look like you're just, you know, glamorizing without making it seem like he's, you know, human. But the movie doesn't really shy away from showing that, but the thing is also is just, you know, how much of a pure person he was. It's like, even when they're showing the dark side, you know, it's even barely that. Like there is the moment when I think it was when Clemens more or less came out to him and he said, you know, like, you know, you if you're going to be on the show, you kind of can't do that. But then that lasted so briefly because all he did was listen to him, and it basically changed his mind about the whole scenario. We also get a bit of a mischievous side to him, like the whole thing about the guy mooning the camera and then him blowing it up like a poster and putting it up and all that. So there are those moments in there where it doesn't just feel like... they're definitely showing all the different sort of, you know, human sides of it, and the fact that, believe it or not, it did seem like, despite the fact that it was all about how he handled it and how he, like, whether it be through the puppets or through the show or through writing or whatever, that there was, like, anger inside of him, and there were things that he, like, did absolutely hate, particularly how he felt like TV wasn't living up to its potential in the way it was shown to basically glorify, you know, violence or, you know, dumb comedy or whatever. So basically anything that would dumb down children's minds as opposed to teaching them, which is what it seemed like, you know, was the perfect thing to use TV for, which is what his whole story is how he managed to go against that and use it in that way. But also, you know, be entertaining in the process also. So he very much found that middle ground to take both reasons people love TV and put them together in a much more educational way and a less sort of dumbing down way. And even, you know, getting to more of the bleaker aspects, like the people outside of his funeral and all that, like the anti-gay people and the fact that they'd recruited their children. But the movie still finds a way to, like, end with this hopeful message. And how it's really this, it is so, like, anti-pessimism. And just really comes through in that way that he probably would have if this was more of an autobiographical, you know, documentary or whatever. Um, and even those moments that involve, like, the people that we do see, like, outside of archive footage, like the moment at the end, like at the very end really, when everybody just sits in silence for a minute and thinks about the people that impacted them, and it's just, it really leaves this strong thing. And like I said, with all the, I'm gonna bring up the cynical view a lot of people have probably a couple of times throughout this video. This will be the first time where it feels like it's nice to see a movie that kind of, it almost seems like it would be too harsh of a term to say this movie confronts that kind of thinking, but it does show you that there is an alternative and there is much more optimism out there. And I'm speaking as somebody that's not an optimistic person, like, ever. So documentaries like this really do mean something, and people like him really do mean something. So that's, so yeah, just really great stuff. 8. This is where we're gonna do the 2 and 1 here, where they go together. Number 8 is Black Panther and Avengers: Infinity War, because the thing here was I was just gonna choose one of them, and it was gonna be Infinity War, because when I kind of came out of Infinity War, it felt like, you know, instantly iconic in a way that really, obviously Black Panther is instantly iconic in its own way, but with Infinity War it was like the way you have everything brought together that this has been building to in the last 10 years, and just how smoothly it all comes together, but they never really lost sight of, like, you know, having characters really care about, having those really big emotional payoffs, having it actually feel like there are stakes. And once again, I know you can look at it as, well, eventually this is all going to clear itself up because we know the other sequels we're getting. But even so, just in the moment, which is what's important, it really does just hit in this big way. And like, I can't say this enough. I've already talked about these quite extensively with reviewing them when they came out and when we did the MCU video over the summer, but still, just Infinity War's existence is a cinematic accomplishment like we've hardly seen. Whether you care about the whole, you know, superhero thing, or the fact that, you know, some people think it's like killing movies and all that, and it's, you know, killing what audiences, like intellectualism in movies and all that, but there, it's really undeniable just how massive an accomplishment this is. And like I said, with all the great characters, and then, you know, take, like, using the effects to that also, because we talk about how, you know, the criticism that really heavy CGI movies have now, but when you look at a character like Thanos as portrayed by Brolin, and it's like the way they were able to take Brolin's performance and also the incredible CGI that we do have and make, like, this incredible, instantly recognizable forever character that is going to be like this, you know, villain for the ages in any movie. And it's, yeah, so just the way that all comes together, and it's, like, even from the opening, when it just feels like they said, this is where we stand, this is what the movie's going to be, because even when it has comedy in it, and as usual, it may feel a bit forced at times, but there's still that sort of bleakness to it. Like, you can tell they sort of abandon most of the whole, like I was talking about, this is the movie that's the follow-up to Thor Ragnarok, which is like one of the most comedic movies of this whole series and brightest. And the fact that they really committed to this just going, you know, as dark as they could, but in the confines still being, you know, an Avengers movie, of course. But there are lines they can't exactly go outside of, but I don't really think that hinders it in a way, especially when you're familiar enough with it. And I know a lot of people use this as a criticism to say the familiarity is what makes them so, the people that see it as bland. But just like I said, the way it's able to maintain that whole line starting in 2008 to now and feel like one enormous cohesive thing with 20 movies in it, you just, yeah, it just seems impossible, and they made the impossible possible. But obviously, as time has gone on, I do think I've started to prefer Black Panther a little bit, especially I just rewatched it on Blu-ray again like a couple of weeks ago, and it looks amazing on Blu-ray. That helps a lot, but I do think also there's just something about that story and that character, because like I said, I was all on board with that character when Civil War happened. I was like, I could not wait to see this movie after I saw Civil War, and like just the second it came on, whether it be the opening where they give you the history or the Sterling K. Brown scene in the '90s, and then when we get to present day, and the way they introduce Wakanda also, where it's like this. They took this like country that feels like an entire world, this fictional country at that, and just made it feel like an entire world all of its own. And with these other characters coming in, like Killmonger, who's such this fleshed out villain. Like I said, he's obviously basically a sort of outline of a Shakespearean character and all that, but sort of tying him in with this world, this country world, what it feels like a world, is taken away from everything else. It feels so separated, and for him to take like American history from his own backstory and combine these two, and that's where he's coming from, just really makes him this interesting and unique character. Really brought to life by Jordan's performance for sure, but Chadwick Boseman also like has to lead this thing, and it's really this. He's another one of those cases where he's made T'Challa such a character. Whenever I see him outside and just doing regular interviews, it's like it almost takes my mind a second to adjust that how different they feel and seem. Obviously, a lot of it's the accent, but still, just a really great job of bringing that character to life. And you've got side characters like Andy Serkis and Lupita Nyong'o, Letitia Wright, Angela Bassett, Forrest Whitaker. It's this in sync ass Winston Duke, definitely. And it just keeps finding things to offer. We got those amazing scenes where they visit the dead and like that. I've forgotten what all the terms are now because I'm so trying to remember everything at once. But that's the thing though, is it's a lot to take in, but it doesn't feel like you're bombarded with it either. It feels like it's just so easy to get sucked in by this. And I didn't mention Daniel Kaluuya either. See, I'm all over the place because there's just so much to love about this thing. But like I said, I feel like I'm repeating myself a lot because I've already extensively talked about it twice this year already. So anything else I could say about these is in those videos. But yes, I love both of these definitely. And I do think that they are like, you take Ant-Man and the Wasp out of it, like it does show that as much as they progressed and as many great movies as have been in this series, the fact that they've been able to just really peak with the last two that they've done so far, really says something about what is to possibly come next. But right now, this is a great, peak that they're at right now. So yes, I really love both of those. 7 is going to be Hereditary. This is a movie that's the thing that stands out the most to me about Hereditary that I really admire is that it's one of those movies where, especially when in the horror genre, we're seeing a lot of really repetitive stuff. With some of these breakout ones happening, but I mean, as far as the ratio goes, it's like 95% shit. But then you have a movie like Hereditary come in, and it's the first thing I think about is if I were to just read a synopsis of Hereditary from beginning to end, just sums up everything that happens in it, I would think this is a movie that never in a million years would actually be made. And maybe not just that, maybe it could be made in a very, very small, independent sort of way, but the fact that it was released in all, like, as a mainstream release in, like, all big theaters is, like, it was so surreal seeing this in the movie theater here in particular that just mainly plays the big movies. And it's like, I cannot believe that this... It's sort of like what I was saying with Infinity War. It's like, it's amazing this exists, but like in a totally, obviously, completely different way. Where it just takes every single left turn. And when I say this, I feel like I'm even underplaying the effect that this movie has. Even when you look at just the opening shot is so insanely mind-blowing. The coming in onto the model, and then it's suddenly the room itself. And like that's just the start. Like with a shot, any other movie with a shot like that would have peaked at that shot. And this movie is just getting started. And obviously, one thing that really brings it to this level are the performances, mainly by Toni Collette and Alex Wolff, and really bring the horror to life also. But that's the thing, is sort of the first half, it constantly feels scary and horrific and like something is just totally off balance. um, but the thing that really brings that horror to life also is the realism of the portrayal of grief, with it starting with the text that's in the form of the obituary of her mother and all that, and then there's more than one funeral in it. There's the whole. They show the two different kinds of grief and how it's portrayed. There's the kind where like nobody's really quite sure how to feel because there wasn't much of a closeness, and then there's what Toni Collette has to do in the middle of the movie, and it's not even the middle. It's more like maybe half an hour or 40 minutes in, when it takes that really big turn that makes the rest of the movie. It takes it on that totally different path, and then the fact that it's able to do this as like hardcore and deep as it possibly can before it's even really reached the horror elements, and then obviously just as much as it went into that, really startling portrayal of grief, it's going to take all that and put it into the horror aspects of it. I said one of my favorite moments of this year in a theater probably was when the movie had already done what it had done up to this point, and then it was the moment when Ann Dowd is going to show her, the seance, and she lights the candle in the dark. And because of everything that had happened in the movie already at this point, when the crowd I saw it with knew a seance was coming because she lit a candle in the dark, you could just hear everybody go, "Oh shit!" Like everybody wanted to run out of the theater because they were afraid of what was about to happen, and it was amazing. I do know there were, some criticisms out there where some people thought it was maybe, interestingly enough, silly. I don't know. I can't even, like, sometimes I could maybe picture why people would think that. I know there's a certain shot at the end that got, unfortunately, some unintentional laughs. I don't know. I think this whole movie is just absolutely, to its absolute core, just. I'm trying to find another synonym for, like, scary or horrific, and none are coming to me. This movie defies synonyms for scary. So that's just what it is. And like I said, by the time it gets to this climax, it's like, and you would think, the Possession movie might be a bit played out at this point. And that was before this came out. And now it's like, I mean, obviously we've had a couple of shitty Possession movies since this came out. And they're always going to exist, but I mean, this is something else. Like, this is another case where, like, you hear about the hype going in. This will kind of go into the number 6 on this list also, but you hear about the hype going in, and this is one of those movies where you think it couldn't possibly live up to that. It can't possibly be as crazy as people are building up that it is. And then, like, this last 20 minutes happens, and it's like... And like I said, even there's a lot of moments in it where it's like, I can't even imagine writing this down in a script and actually thinking you're going to get this thing made. And that's the beauty of those studios that are willing to take those risks like that and make movies like this and really take the horror genre in this direction and say, I know you've got all your generic shit over here, and maybe sometimes that works, but you can also do this kind of shit. You can just take it to this whole other kind of level, and it's obviously... A lot of, big horror movies, particularly in the Possession area, are going to get The Exorcist comparisons. And this is like the first movie, maybe ever, that warrants that. When it says, it's one of those cases where, like, on the cover it says, it's like The Exorcist, only more insane. And it's like, yeah, I totally buy that comparison now. And so yeah, I don't know what else to say about that. It's a movie where it's like, I needed a lot of the lights on in this house at least a couple of days after I saw it for the first time. And even the second time I watched it at home, it was during the day, and it's still, even during the day, it still just got right under my damn skin and didn't go anywhere, so... Yeah, and I'm really interested to see, like, where this director's career goes. I think I read he's got something else already lined up, but just down the line, I'm just really curious where else this goes. But this was like, yes, insane in the best possible way, and that's going to kind of continue on, because number 6 is Mandy. Once again, Mandy's another one of those movies that had so much hype behind it because it went to like Sundance, and it was going to be another one of those, crazy Nicolas Cage movies. He's like got the chainsaw and he's drenched in blood, and that's what all the promotional pictures look like. But this obviously is like a whole other level than what you associate with the whole Nicolas Cage movie now, especially since he's really stuck in straight to video land. But I mean, this is an entirely different thing. It's not only is it an entirely different thing for Cage's filmography, it's an entirely different thing for the Revenge movie. Which it's like, how many other ways can you do that? Because Revenge is the name of another movie that came out over the summer, or I saw over the summer. That's really good. Also, once again, in another year, may have even made this list. But it's like there's only so much you can do with the Revenge movie, or so you may have thought. And so Mandy comes along, and there is, I think, Panos Cosmatos is the director, and there's not a whole lot you can put into words about this movie. I tried for like 20 minutes when I reviewed it. I don't remember what I said, but I'm sure it was just raving. So the thing here, though, is that, I mean, it could potentially be one of those movies that, like, lives a life even more rich in the mind as opposed to when you're actually watching it. But it is one of those cases. Somebody highly recommended. You have to watch it on Blu-ray with the best sound system in pitch blackness. So I tried that when the Blu-ray came out, and sure enough, yes. And like I said, this is like the prime example of that you don't really need a story that's going to totally break the mold to make something so insane, so unique, so memorable, so fucking insane. And it's, I mean, obviously it's gonna have, like, it's gonna be blood drenched, it's gonna be totally drug fueled, and you think you may have in mind what to anticipate from that, but it's one of those things where it's not really a movie you can even be prepared for, but at the same time, it's like it doesn't really go into, like, it is insanely over the top. It's as over the top as you can possibly get. Yet within the movie and what they establish from the get-go, and Cage really works hard a lot to keep this a consistent thing in it, where it's like, whenever it does do something totally insane, like even if he has, a sword fight, but instead of swords they're chainsaws, or, he sorts all the cocaine that he has, and he takes LSD and his head explodes and his face melts off, and then he just goes and kills everybody. Whenever stuff like that happens, it feels less like you're saying, wow, they're really trying to go as over the top as possible, and you're more saying, yeah, this is absolutely the next step in this movie. Like, it just feels like this is exactly where this movie's headed. And that may sound like it has, like, a lack of surprise. No, though, this movie hardly has anything but a lack of surprise, but, so yeah, and you've got Linus Roche doing the villain part, and Andrea Riceborough as the title character, and these three in general just sort of set the thing off. There's all those weird-ass side characters also. There's the whole, demon biker people that are, like, straight out of Mad Max / Hellraiser, and it's like I said, it's like it's trying to throw so much into it, but at the same time, it just all comes together in a way, and you just accept the craziness so much. Almost like you yourself are being driven insane enough by the movie that it almost feels like home when it gets to the ultimate crazy shit that it comes to. And it's like, yes, this is exactly how this should be. And yeah, so like I said, words really do, like, fail me when it comes to this movie. Like I said, it's really just something you have to experience in the best possible way, and that's all I can really leave you with there if you haven't seen it already. So, yeah. So 5, we're going back into the horror genre. 5 is going to be A Quiet Place. For a few reasons. First off, obviously, it's, once again, reached a very popular status quickly based on the concept alone, which is really nice. And once again, though, when you have a movie with a concept like this that even attempts to do something, different or creative or whatever, you're going to have the people that do nitpick the shit out of it. And obviously, and especially since it does try to set up the rules as much as it can. But for the most part, I feel like it's half about the realism and the rules and all that, and the other half is more about just kind of the feel in general. And an example I tend to use is at the very beginning when they're leaving the store and you see the newspapers and the big headline is "It's sound," to where it's like when they found out before it got really apocalyptic what the deal was with them. And of course, the nitpick to that is how you ever going to have a printing press make those papers silently. It's like they had to have died, and those papers never would have made it to stands. But that's the thing where that's the kind of thing I'm not thinking about, because I love like the old-fashioned monster movie appeal to seeing like a newspaper headline, saying stuff like that. It felt like such this old-fashioned thing and really added to just the atmosphere of it in general. Like I said, if it's adding to the atmosphere in a really effective way, I'm not really concerned about how it fits into the rules of the world. And that's the kind of thing where you just kind of have to pick and choose. It really just depends on the person. But so stuff like that is hardly anything I'm thinking about. I mainly took this movie from the whole atmospheric angle alone, especially with being able to pretty much be engulfed by the whole world immediately with the whole lack of dialogue. And just those opening shots that we get and the way it's really showing just the emptiness and the quietness of the world. And like I said, mainly sticking with these four main characters. With really only one other live character that's not one of the monsters coming in for very briefly. And so that's the thing also. So you have this horror concept, and you have, the big monsters. It has the big opening scene where the movie's not going to shy away from showing you the monsters. Like, enough movies have done that. This is going to show you immediately what you're afraid of, which is great and effective. Like, once again, it depends on the execution with that, and Krasinski pulled that off flawlessly. But the thing here also is that, much like Hereditary, what's really going to add to the horror of this is how you feel about the characters in general and how they portray the emotions that go into what's actually happening here. Because so many horror movies just kind of let the death happen and the characters just kind of have to go through the motions. But this and Hereditary really are movies that stick to how this affects the characters and how they interact with themselves and how that's going to affect the situations that they're in later. In two totally different ways. While the family in Hereditary was really spreading out in their different directions, everybody in A Quiet Place is slowly coming more together after having kind of been split up a little bit after the death of the kid in the opening scene. Because you've got the Millicent Simmons character feeling guilty, and her and Krasinski having the distance between them. And it's the interactions are kind of, two at a time between them. It's not like... It's a while before it feels like a full family, because there's always those things going on, but it's like what's going on between them. Then you got the interaction between Krasinski and the boy when they're at the waterfall and the fishing and all that, which is a really great scene. That moment when Krasinski talks for the first time under the waterfall, and it's like it's sort of that really comforting moment where it's like and it's so appropriate that the first words we really hear outright that aren't whispered or subtitled are the words "you're all right," and it's like that whole feeling, that whole waterfall scene just really makes that. And then there is like the interaction between Blunt and the kid when they're doing the math, and she's showing the much more motherly side. She's got much more of like her sense of humor is still intact, whereas Krasinski has like been like the whole world has kind of brought him to this I need to constantly remain protective and in warrior mode and all that, which is a nice contrast to that also. But then obviously they have still their romantic scenes like the dance scene in the basement and all that, and then there's the moment towards the end when Blunt and Millicent Simmons cry together. Like they don't have one full family moment, but they all get the individual moments together that eventually fit together like a puzzle piece until we... And once again, obviously they're not, a full family by the end, unfortunately, but it's sort of to be able to have that tragedy sort of underlying it also, not just what happens to the characters, but the fact that this has happened at all, like to the world, it really plays that up nicely. But another thing that I just kind of feel about this movie that's much more of a personal thing would be that that's really what it is. It's because I saw it 3 times in theaters before it even came out on Blu-ray. But the first time was obviously the day it came out, and then the second time was it was about this year ago. It was a decade that my dad moved away from here, and he was like whenever he comes back, it's like for a week, and we usually do other things, but when he still lived here, we went to the movies like all the time. And for the first time in that almost decade that he moved away, the last time he came in, we finally went to a movie, and it was this one. And so there's kind of that connotation I have to that now, that it's kind of that personal thing. And then by the time because this movie was out for 2 months, at least here, which here is a long time. So there was, after seeing it the first time and then that second time where it's the my dad connection, that third time was I had been there in the morning to see another movie, but the projector didn't work. And thankfully, the manager that was working is somebody that knew me. So he said, you can just, wait for the next showtime in like the back of another movie or something. And so this was playing and had just started. So I basically killed time by watching this in a practically empty theater very early in the morning. And watching it and having that familiarity after those first 2 times, where I already felt like I knew it front to back, it was like, it felt less like just watching the movie again and more like dropping in on an old friend. Like, it felt so familiar to me, and it was so kind of surreal, just kind of be in this practically empty theater with it. So yeah, it just really brings out feelings like that, like I said, it's really just the kind of the experience of how I saw it, as opposed to something the other movies may not have in its favor. But so yeah, so on top of just, I do think it's amazingly well done and so well put together and such a great concept that's so well executed. Well, not to mention the constant cycle that Blunt is doing here, whether it be she has to constantly be in fear. There's a lot of physical pain. There's the sort of maternal instincts that she has and that sort of motherly vibe that she does so well. And then eventually has to be flinging the shotgun around like in that badass fashion. It's like these are such 4 almost entirely different characters that she's just on a constant cycle doing throughout the 90 minutes there are this movie. And that's the thing too, is I was talking about how I felt about this movie after having seen it those 3 times before I even watched it again at home, and it's like there's almost like a sort of comforting vibe to it now because I'm so familiar with it. And I know comforting is a really weird word to use about a movie that's like so intense and has like so many, jump scares, and it's this horror movie. Watching my favorite actress in the world go through the physical and emotional wringer throughout it. But in the process of her doing that gives what is my favorite performance of the year, like in any category, in any movie. So yeah, so a lot of reasons why I really have taken to A Quiet Place, especially over time. So that's how that fits in here. So number 4 is going to be Bad Times at the El Royale. This is a movie that I was hyped for quite some time, especially being a growing fan of Drew Goddard's. Like, he obviously co-wrote and directed Cabin in the Woods. He wrote The Martian, or adapted The Martian, I should say. And goes in a totally different direction now to bring us this thing, which feels like it already had points going for it because it was getting a lot of Tarantino comparisons going in, which obviously for me is immediately a plus. But it does definitely feel like its own thing also, where we have all these different characters. It's an amazing cast list, from Jeff Bridges to John Hamm to Cynthia Erivo, Chris Hemsworth, Lewis Pullman, even Dakota Johnson, who is slowly growing on me. And I'm sure I'm even forgetting people. But the thing here is that what this movie does, the things I'm going to say that I really love about Bad Times at the El Royale, I could easily also see being criticisms from other people. And that is the fact that it seems to be constantly changing what it is. But what I love about that is this is a story that's basically meant to be sort of unpredictable. And so what better way to do that than not only kind of keep changing what seems to be the character's motives, but also the style and exactly what directions we're going to go. Because when you start off, you think it might be one thing, you think this character might be somebody, and then not only is that character somebody else, the style is going to start changing up in itself. like the whole thing where the whole old concept, like the Rashomon concept, where we see one event from like a bunch of different perspectives, and it sets you up for a while to think maybe that's going to be the concept, and then suddenly it's a whole other thing. And the way it's constantly playing with the timeline, sometimes it comes back around, sometimes it goes in a totally different direction. Yet somehow all these characters do manage to come together in this way, despite how many backstories we have to jump around to, but it always finds its way to this climax that we're headed towards. And sometimes, the scenes can be feel like really long. Sometimes they don't even need dialogue. The scene with John Hamm behind, the mirrors, the scene where Cynthia Erivo sings while Bridges does what he needs to do. There's so many scenes in this movie that feel like scenes you would see in like a bunch of classic thrillers. Like if scenes from this movie were in like thrillers from the old days, like the '70s or something, they would be classic scenes from those movies for sure. And it feels like we got all those into one movie. And it's like if we're going by the Tarantino comparisons, Tarantino had talked about when he made The Hateful Eight. He talked about like how every character was like a supporting character from a different movie or something, all in one. If that's the case for that, Bad Times at the Royale is kind of like I could see every single character in this movie leading their own movie, and you would get so many different genres out of that if that were the case. And like I said, it's all leading to this big climax with Chris Hemsworth playing our bad guy. And as I was saying, this scene like really affected me in the theater in a way that I hadn't been affected for a while, where it was the roulette scene in particular. I could like feel my heart beating in my chest, and it was so intense to the point that it's not till like Chris Hemsworth is removed from this movie that I could feel my heartbeat like slowing down again. And it's like that's when I realized how much of an impact his character was making on me and his performance here in general. Even though it might seem like he's just doing the whole smooth Hemsworth thing just with a bit more evil in him, I think it's an amazing performance. And you've got Lewis Pullman, who's like a star in the making, given this really richly layered, intense performance. More so as it goes on. He's also a big reason the finale is so intense by the way he's just reacting off everything. But Cynthia Erivo really seems to be sort of the breakout here, and it's not just those, breaks where she can express so much through singing and bring so many scenes to life with that, where a lot of the times just her singing within the scene is what a lot of the movie's soundtrack is to go with the different scenes, particularly that ham scene behind the windows, but, yeah, and obviously Bridges brings some amazing different... That's the thing, too, is the characters aren't just, like, oh, you think they're one thing, but they're actually another. But when we really get to see inside them, particularly characters like Pullman or Bridges, it's like there's so much more underneath all this. Like, there are so many damn layers to peel away from this movie. And I just can't get enough of going back and really thinking about these characters. And yeah, that says nothing about, the seppies as they get themselves involved in. And it's just really this crazy ass awesome. I mean, it's not maybe as crazy as some people, because some people go into it thinking it's going to be like this constant wild ride, but it is 2 hours and 20 minutes, and a lot of that is dialogue, but somehow it still manages to keep like that awesome cool feel to it, to where it does, like I said, it may not be what people are expecting if they hear that kind of thing, but there definitely is that in there. And then lastly, really, it's one of those movies also where it's like having it as number 4 on this list was something that was probably always going to happen as soon as I saw it. I knew it was going to be at least top 5. But there have been a number of people where when I tell them how much I like this movie, they basically say, like, they tell me that this movie had me written all over it. And they knew it would be a movie that I would feel this way about, and it's like, what, like... compliment to be so associated with this movie in that way, to where people see this and they automatically think, oh, that's totally something he'd take to. I definitely embrace that for all it's worth. So that's how I feel about that. Number 3 is going to be The Death of Stalin. The Death of Stalin was like going to be in like the 7 or 8 territory and then I had the great pleasure of finally getting to see it again. And after a second viewing, it shot up here to 3. Because this, I mean, not only is it one of the funniest movies in a long time, easily the funniest movie of the year, and the best comedy of the year. There is, once again, it kind of starts at the opening scene, where when you watch the whole first 15 minutes or so with Paddy Considine and this performance going on and him trying to record it and all that, it's like, this is a movie where Stalin giving orders, people act on those orders, hilarity ensues, could have been the whole movie, and it totally would have worked. But then obviously the title has to happen. So, and obviously the pacing here is going to really work also. It's about an hour and 45 minutes, and it's roughly, what, half an hour in maybe when, you know, the event happens and then everything takes off. But the whole thing just feels like this constant barrage of these... I struggled to say the word jokes, because it doesn't feel like that kind of humor, especially if you're familiar with the rest of Energy's work, like, you know, Veep and The Thick of It and In the Loop and stuff like that. Where obviously there's going to be a lot of very fast talking, a lot of profanity, a lot of anger, and it's all going to come together gloriously. Because I feel like we're getting kind of... It's getting a bit tired, especially in this sort of Bill Burr era, where it's like everybody thinks it's hilarious to just listen to people rant and rave and be angry and all that. But this director makes it such an art form that it's really... You can't imitate this. And so what we have here is... the thing about that is, I say, you know, it's, you know, the ranting and raving era and all that, but there's so many different kinds of laughs in this movie, because obviously it's a very, very dark comedy, very, very dark, but, and you would think, you know, it's mainly just going to be like guilty laughs, because that's usually what you get out of a dark comedy, but I mean, this has, like, you know, really big laughs. It has those laughs where it's like, you know, they're small, but you can acknowledge how funny it actually is. There's sometimes where you may not even laugh at all, but in your head you're thinking, that's really funny, or that's really clever, or whatever. But it's the thing, the way it goes through all these different places. It's got the dark humor, it's got the dry humor, it's got the broad humor, it's got slapstick, it's got running jokes, like the way how, you know, Jeffrey Tambor's character always just kind of kills a room is a joke that keeps coming back, which is really funny given the position he takes later. And then, like I said, you've got, you know, the big laughs, you've got the small laughs, you've got the guilty laughs, you've got the silent laughs, you've got everybody, all these different places, whether it's coming from characters being angry, from characters being bewildered, from characters accidentally hurting themselves, or other people even. And a lot of it's through this beautiful dialogue. Like, as somebody who does a lot of writing, this is the kind of movie that makes me envious. Like, I watch movies like this, and it's just like, why can't I do that? Like, I would kill to be able to write stuff like this. And it's just... Yeah, and obviously you've got this cast. Simon Russell Beale giving one of the great performances of the year. You've got Steve Buscemi, you've got Michael Palin, I mentioned Jeffrey Tambor, Rupert Friend, Olga Kurylenko. It's endless. Andrea Riseborough again. Richard Brake is in there, who was also in Mandy. And it's that's really not much else I can say. It's like, it's really hard to describe, like, what makes a movie, you know, funny, especially like comedies are like one of the hardest things to even review, if you want to call it that, because it's like just the execution. It's all about that, whether it be the deliveries of these great actors or the fact that, you know, in what I think Simon Russell Beale does so well also here that makes his performance really stand out over the... I mean, it's a great ensemble. Jason Isaacs, I forgot to mention. There's something that makes him stand out over the others, despite the fact that there's so much great stuff coming from the actors, is that darkness really comes from him, because his character is like, you know, behind his eyes you can just see the pure insanity and the evil that's lurking in him. Yet to see him so hilariously interact with everybody else, and the way people react to him, the way he reacts to people, the things that he does, the choices that he makes, it all is just this beautiful comedic masterpiece. Like I said, it is easily one of the funniest movies in a long time, and it's very much doesn't lose its luster either, because I said I've watched it twice now. The first time I watched it, I thought it was hilarious. I laughed consistently, and it was like that was probably the best comedy of the year, probably. The second time I watched it, I laughed so hard, my stomach hurt, and I probably almost pissed myself. It was it's really that great. So I guess I did like stuff like In the Loop, but it was only so much my style. But this like is a whole other level. This is for me personally. This is easily my favorite thing that he's done as a writer and director. So yeah, I just absolutely love this. Um, so two is going to be Mary Poppins Returns, obviously, and once again. We were talking when we talked about Won't You Be My Neighbor, and we were talking about the cynicism that people really like to bring into the way they view movies now. I mean, it's been around pretty much forever, but I mean, it's really yeah. So when this movie comes along, it is really this sort of battling thing because obviously when I talked about it, when I had just come back, I had just walked through the door when I talked about it, and I was obviously, just going on and on about how amazing it felt and how much I wish I'd never had to leave the theater and how enchanting it was and all that. How amazing Blunt is, the production design, the music, all that stuff. Lin-Manuel Miranda, everything about this movie. So it's like maybe it'll wear off, but it really hasn't. Like, it really hasn't at all. And it's been kind of a bummer to listen to a lot of the criticisms that have been starting to get thrown at it, which aren't surprising. But the funniest thing to me is the fact that it is a movie that is so sort of anti-cynicism. But the thing about that is people have been saying that it's a needless ripoff. It's Disney milking it for money. It's all that stuff. It's soulless. The songs aren't memorable. Whatever they're gonna say. And it's like it's a movie that you can't like unless you're like some corporate sheep or whatever the hell it is they say. But the thing is like this was clearly a passion project from Rob Marshall's perspective. You can just the way he talks about it, the way Blunt talks about the way he pitched her, and how he reacted to getting the job and being told that he could make this. It was absolutely positively from everyone involved such a labor of love and such a passion project. And the way that Marshall was kind of able to intoxicate the people that he brought onto the set and really get them. Obviously, if you're going to do a movie like this, if you already love the material and all that stuff, it's going to be a big deal. But apparently Marshall played a huge part in like getting everybody just really, really into this and just really throwing every ounce of love that they had into it. And it's like, and they keep saying, especially Blunt keeps saying, the whole idea is that it's supposed to be this huge breath of fresh air, where we're being so bombarded with like cynicism and all that, and the fact that cynicism is exactly what it's being met with is not surprising at all. Because that's the thing too, is I try not to get too bent out of shape in regards to people not liking something that I like. I just talked about that at the beginning, where it's like obviously opinions are going to differ, so what? But I mean, when it gets to stuff like Julie Andrews, obviously a lot of people were saying, like if it's not Julie Andrews, I don't care. If it's not Julie Andrews, it's a cash grab. There's a reason Julie Andrews isn't in it. Of course, Julie Andrews, as said many times before, she had enough respect and encouragement towards Blunt and faith in her that she didn't want to come in and take the spotlight away from her, which is exactly what would have happened. Everybody knows it. So, as amazing as she is. And the fact that Andrews did know that and stepped aside, and even Andrews, after seeing the movie, has gone on to say that she was totally enchanted by it and loves it. So, of course, it's some pathetic attempt at cynicism. Somebody will probably say, "Oh, but Disney paid her to say that" and stuff like that. I don't think that at all. I don't think that's likely at all. And it's really just. Yeah, and I just and as I was saying also, it's one of those movies where usually, I can accept, people saying criticisms of a movie they don't like, even if I do like it, because it's like, yeah, I can see where they would say that, or I can see where they would say that. 9 times out of 10, the criticisms I hear about this movie, I just cannot relate to. Like, people will say what they didn't like about it, and it's just like, that's just so far away from my way of thinking. So it's like, I mean, I respect people that have different opinions and maybe don't like it for legitimate reasons. But I can't relate to those. There's just way, way too much. I was absolutely hypnotized by this thing. for the entire 2 hours and 10 minutes. It was one of those cases where not only was it just like, every song, every number, and like I said, the production design, the way it's shot, the performances, anything. And like I said, starting kind of small from doing, we start with the Miranda song, and then we go into Ben Wishaw's song about his wife, before we finally get to the bath scene and the big number there, and the way it sort of gradually got bigger as it went, and then just went completely off. And then we got the animation. We've got a nice old-fashioned classic feeling villain in Colin Firth. And in a climax that feels very much like, old-fashioned Disney, the way it used to be at one point, without feeling like it's being derivative. And like I said, feeling like a sequel, as it's supposed to, and not, like a remake or a reboot or whatever the hell you want to call it. And it was one of those cases also where, like, it's been a very long time since I felt that way watching a movie, just the whole time, where it was like every single second of it I just wanted more of, to the point that, once again, this is something I don't even know if I've ever felt this before, let alone recently, and that was like a genuine sadness as I left the theater because it was over. I mean, yeah, there's going to be a sadness, watching her fly away obviously is very sad and all that, but I mean, the fact that the movie was over was what was bumming me out. and after 2 hours and 10 minutes, no less, and you would think it would get tired, but like I said, it's just constantly, and especially when you, like, know what's coming, like I was saying, every time it seemed like it was gonna, this scene, the bass scene can't be topped, then Triple O Life Fantastic happens, and then it just keeps going, and you got the climax, and then it's like, what can they possibly do here? And it's like, oh yeah, I forgot, the Dick Van Dyke scene hasn't happened yet. And then once that happens, we've got the whole ending, we've got Angela Lansbury, we've got everybody flying, and yes, sure, a lot of the songs probably mirror the others from the original movie. I would say that's intentional. I mean, it would have to be, and it's not something that bothers me at all, because they do take on their own life themselves, and the scenes themselves have their own particular impact. That's not in any way influenced by the first movie. I do really feel like they stand alone, even if one, homages the others. So yeah, I can't really say. I don't know that I have a bad thing to say about it. Like, I'm reaching and I can't find it. It's like, maybe as time goes on and I see it more times, I'll start to be able to point things out. But in the meantime, I know some people don't like the street scene. I don't really remember anything in particular I disliked about it, and I do think the Upside Down room is a really cool set. So yeah, even that I can say good things about. So yeah, I've got nothing. So number one is not going to be surprising if you've been watching our awards videos and the movie I've really been pulling for throughout the season. So number one obviously is BlacKkKlansman. I have been a Spike Lee fan for quite some time, and a lot of people have been trying to say, like, oh, he's falling off and stuff like that. It's not like, yeah, there was, like, Red Hook Summer and his, Kickstarter movie and all that stuff. It does feel like very lower and just kind of there. Chirac I really wasn't a fan of. But stuff like, 25th Hour has been out there. I'm a huge fan of Bamboozled. I don't know how many people have even seen it, but, so I've always felt like he's always here, he just kind of comes in and out. But then making this thing, which already has an intriguing concept as it is, of this black guy infiltrating the Ku Klux Klan, but the whole thing is also the whole, it's a true story thing, and the fact that he sort of took the... I heard him, Spike Lee, say at the roundtable recently, the director's roundtable, that he's very adamant about not using the word comedy at all when describing this movie. But there is something about, like, there was, Adam Driver was talking about the fact that towards the beginning, when he's first talking over the phone, after they've met him as Adam Driver, and then they're talking to John David Washington on the phone, and he says, like, oh yeah, I sound different because I have a cold. And it's like, that might sound like poor writing, but apparently that's exactly what Ron Stallworth said and got away with it. And so when you take it from that perspective, and that's the thing is about what Spike Lee was saying about comedy, is the fact that while he doesn't consider it a comedy, he was absolutely going to run with this absurd thing and find the humor in it for sure, because even in concept, it's already there. You can't get away from it. You have to embrace it. But he was able to do that without, going full comedy. Because there's, on top of that, though, because, like, when we have the scenes where Adam Driver is infiltrating them, There, and even scenes where we see them by themselves, like the clan members, there is definitely something deeply unsettling. Well, obviously, given the subject matter, but I mean, we really get to see these characters like individually. The scene of the two of them in bed talking about how they're gonna, they finally get to kill black people is like one of the most unsettling scenes I've seen in a long time. Where it's like they're this married couple that's basically talking about they're talking in tone as if they're about to go on this big cruise or vacation or something, but they're talking about killing black people, and it is so incredibly unnerving. And then you've got the fact that what bookends the movie, which I know a lot of people found a bit, kind of overdoing it a bit, but where you have the starting point where we have, the footage and the Alec Baldwin scene, and then the end when it's punctuated with like the Charlottesville footage and stuff like that, and the tribute. There is this. It does to me feel like this whole like I can't imagine the movie really without that stuff, because while it is this in the middle, it's this incredible like 70s cop movie. Like it's Spike Lee said that like his biggest inspiration for making the main part of the movie was The French Connection. Like they kind of watched that and figured it out from there. And you really do get that vibe, and it's like that sort of crime movie is exactly the kind of thing that I just eat up. And when you've got the performances in here like John David Washington, particularly, I guess I've been saying ever since I saw it, Adam Driver just really kind of Washington is great, but Driver just really takes off with this movie and really because you've got the middle portion where it's sort of where it brings in the fact that not only is it the just hatred for black people, but the fact that Driver's character is also Jewish and has to hide that. And the fact that he's kind of confronting that for the first time, where like his Jewish heritage isn't something he'd ever thought about until he was doing this, and then there's the scene where he says, "Now it's like all I think about." And there's like so many individual powerful moments like that. And the scene where Washington confronts him and says, like, why don't you care more about this being Jewish? Like, how can you be so nonchalant about it? And watching Driver's character like change as that gets to him more and more throughout it. And still, you have the interactions with Topher Grace's character, where, like I said, he does manage to kind of stay away from going full blown comedy, but it's certainly going to have humor in it. And then we eventually get to this climax where you've got this. There's just so many things going on here, where it's like Washington's there as Topher Grace's bodyguard, and it's like, will he recognize his voice? Will he not recognize his voice? Then there's the whole thing about planting the bomb. There's the will Driver's identity get revealed by Nicholas Sotero. There's like because a lot of people thought there was too much going on in the climax. I love how much is going on in the climax because it just really brings all these different things together. It just really comes to this big moment. And on top of all of this, we've got the Harry Belafonte scene where we keep cutting back to him giving this, big speech. It's sort of similar to like. It also kind of feels like the way we bookend it with the Alec Baldwin scene and the real footage from today. It also sort of feels like a bookend when we get the speech at the beginning that Stallworth is undercover at, and then we've got the Harry Belafonte scene. And like I said, the fact that we've got this really profound scene with this really, I guess, I mean, I hate to say this, but Harry Belafonte is one of those people that I keep forgetting is alive. But that's the thing is he's had such a long legacy. To see somebody like him just be the sort of start of the climax of this whole thing and everything this is building to, it's a really powerful moment, not just from what he's saying in the scene itself, but like what it's leading into and how it works in the narrative of the scene too. Just all comes together in this really great way. And I said a lot of suspenseful scenes. There's the lie detector scene, but most scenes you would expect in an undercover cop movie. But I mean, the undercover cop movie, especially with the approach taken here with more of the '70s vibe, like there is so much you can do with that. It is one of the aspects of that genre that's so easy to make something great out of if you have talented people involved, and this movie certainly does. And so, yeah, so like I said, I mainly see it as like just this incredible crime cop movie, which is something that I already love anyway. But just the whole bookend with the footage feels like it's in that moment with that final punctuation where it goes from this incredibly amazing cop movie, an undercover cop movie, with like a 70s vibe to it, going back to stuff like, you know, the French Connection, and actually being able to evoke that without seeming like a knockoff, and really do its own thing and have its own power. But then when this final moment happens, it's really adds this whole sort of profound thing, that you would think once again would seem like a bit odd. Like this movie's tone could have been fucked if Lee didn't know exactly what he was doing and his editor didn't know exactly what he was doing. But it's so beautifully put together. It all somehow manages to find a way to feel like a whole complete story to show this is what it was, then this is where it was, and this is where we are now, and just that sort of one line that goes through, despite how distant all three of these things must feel from each other, and just comes together in this really beautiful way, and you just really walk out of it feeling like you watched something really powerful and really great, with just a really awesome cop movie in the middle of it. So, yeah, so that's what this year has. And I'm like I said, I'm really happy with this because there were a lot of, looking back on it now, there were a lot more great movies this year than I even realized. So, so that's what this year is. I guess we'll see what next year can bring. We're not off to the greatest of starts, but we hardly ever are. So, yeah. So I think until next year, that's gonna be it for this.